Welcome to our latest Rising Tide Ocean podcast. This is David Helvarg, and my co-host with the most remains Vicki Nichols-Goldstein.
Hello, everybody.
So, Vicki, you've dove in the Florida Keys.
I have. I actually got my NOAA working diver certification in the Florida Keys quite a long time ago. And back in the day, it was magnificent.
Right. A NOAA diver. I know when I was 15, my mom took my sister and me down there. And at the time, I thought I was a generation too soon to explore alien worlds. And then I got a mask and snorkel and went off the seawall by the Key Western. And there were like living rocks and shoaling fish and my first hammerhead and sea turtles. And it was amazing, whole alien world. And today we're happy to be talking with someone who really knows the Florida Keys, Dr. Alex Brylske, a veteran of the dive industry, recently retired professor of marine science at the College of the Florida Keys, where he taught coral reef ecology, among other topics. He's a founder of Ocean Education International and the author of a recent book, Beneath the Blue Planet, A Diver's Guide to the Ocean. So, Alex, good to talk to you. But before we get into some of the very topics you report on or what you've seen on more than 5,000 dives, let me just ask, what was your first exposure to the ocean, first point in your life where you got into the blue?
Well, I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. So I was a water kid from the get-go. But actually seeing the ocean was probably a few years later. Like most people in the 1960s, I taught myself to dive. I cajoled my father into buying me a scuba tank and regulator from Honest Archie in Jamaica, New York, who was a major mail order house at that time. Began diving in 1966 as one of many water activities. But what really made its mark, as you were saying before, was my exposure to the Florida Keys. In 1968, my parents took the family down to the Florida Keys, and one sultry August morning, I jumped off onto Sombrero Reef, and it was literally a life-defining experience because I didn't know what I wanted to do, as a 16-year-old kid, but I knew it was going to involve the ocean, and it was that perspective, my baseline of 1968, I hold with me to this day. And it's what makes it so difficult, frankly, for me now to dive in the Florida Keys, because I truly knew what it was. And in my lifetime, it's decayed to such a point that it's almost unrecognizable.
Before we get to the challenge and grief of that, what was the course of your career in terms of diving?
Well, I actually trained as a history teacher. And while I was in college, I became a scuba instructor. And when I graduated, I assumed I was going to become a history teacher, but I graduated into a glut of there were very few teaching positions at that time. And I took what I thought would be a part-time job at a dive shop, and soon found that that was more rewarding and fun than being in a classroom. And in 1976, I entered the scuba industry full time and spent the next 18 years in a wide range of jobs, in virtually everything from working in a dive shop to working at PADI headquarters in the 1980s. So that was what I call the first half of my career. But in that time, as I indicated, I watched the ocean, particularly coral reefs, just continue to circle the toilet bowl. And by the early 90s, I wanted to do something about it. And while I had all good intentions, I lacked any credential to do so. And so I went back to graduate school in 1994 to get some background in coral reef ecology and tropical marine resource management and all the necessary credentials and diplomas. And I shifted. I didn't change. I call what I did a shift in my career. From diver education to marine conservation. And I spent a few years at some NGOs, the Coral Reef Alliance and Project Aware Foundation. And then in 2009, I had a wonderful opportunity to join the faculty at the College of the Florida Keys. And that was just a wonderful experience that provided, incredible opportunities. And I pulled the plug there about 3 years ago, and I've been doing some interesting and exciting things ever since.
You have a beautiful book out, Beneath the Blue Planet. And gosh, it covers everything from how the ocean works, the world of coral reefs, sharks, and what I think is so important is what you call doing the right thing. And with your background in marine conservation and diving and your teaching and all of your experience, it seems like this book is really that culmination of a lifetime of work. I want you to talk about doing the right thing. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's important that divers be knowledgeable about the ocean, of course, and that can be challenging because there's so much information with the internet now, especially that just wading through what is where to find information can be difficult. So the challenge to me in writing the book was to create a relatively comprehensive source of information that would be kind of focused to divers, snorkelers, and basically, as I say, anyone who has the initiative to put on a mask. But that's only part of the process. It's not merely having the knowledge, it's also having the desire, the motivation, and the skill to put that into play. And that's really what the final section of the book is all about: how to take that information and be a responsible diver, a responsible consumer, and essentially really consider your relationship with the ocean and its residents, and make a difference, to become part of the solution rather than the problem.
You said in your book, knowledge without action is useless. Your knowledge base, as you say, you spent a lot of your career in the dive industry with PADI, the Professional Association of Dive Instructors, and others. You'd think the dive industry would be the cutting edge of conservation, protecting what we love, but that doesn't really seem to be what's happening.
Well, I would 100% agree with you. And one of the points I often make in my discussions I still teach dive professionals pretty frequently. And I would like to say that our industry has led the way. But to be perfectly honest, we've been dragged into the 21st century by consumer demand, because what has happened in the dive community is not just restricted to the dive community. Consumers in general now are very much committed to sustainability, and basically the dive consumer is demanding that the people that they engage with exercise the same kind of responsibility. And so it's kind of an unusual situation, but that's really what's come to pass. It's a dive professional cannot afford not to operate in a sustainable way, because they won't be around long. It's finally come to pass that people are beginning to recognize just what dire state the ocean is in, and they expect the people they do business with to have a positive impact on that. The problem is essentially with our professional development process. We put a lot of time into training people to supervise and manage and teach divers and make sure that they're safe and are skilled, reflected in a very good accident rate. But there's very little, if you look at the curriculum in any professional development program, the time that's spent on the environment is minimal. It's not zero, but it's quite minimal. And so, of course, with the professionals having a minimal knowledge of the environment, they're not going to be able to convey much to their students. And hence the students come out of the course, even if they're competent divers, really not understanding the ecosystem. And what that leads to, because they don't know really what it's all about, they're initially enthralled with the beauty and the spectacle, but they soon become bored with that. And I think that's one of the reasons we have the dropout rate that we do. And so that I think has persisted for as long as the current training model has been in existence. And it was really one of the prime motivations for writing the book, because I'm the kind of person, I hate people who complain and don't offer answers. And my answer to this, at least partially, was a source of knowledge for dive professionals. And that's really how I focused the book. I have had some, I don't know, criticism or comments from divers saying, my God, it's so much information. And, for someone that's just cursorily, interested, I can understand that. The book is really written as a knowledge base for professionals. And so that is what is in the book is what I believe a dive professional should possess in their repertoire of knowledge. I think that the common misconception is that all you need to do to change someone's attitude or instill a particular ethos is to teach them more, fill their head full of more information. And that's not the case. That's not the case at all. We need to look at a different pathway. In my view, there are three pathways to learning. I call the hand, heart, and hand, heart, and head. And the knowledge issue is just appealing to the head. We have to appeal to the heart. And you do that. And the perfect analogy is if you want to communicate some concept to someone, you can give them a textbook or you can give them a novel. And it's the novel that's going to make the impact, because that's what's going to grab them, in the essence, in making that point. And that's what interpretation is all about. It's understanding that the goal is to inspire, not to merely educate.
In teaching reef ecology and sustainable tourism, I assume it's a lot of field work. You have to take people out into the water to understand what's happening and to make that hard connection. Nancy Knowlton, a friend of ours who we've had on the show, talked about going to Indonesia and discovering all the oceanography students weren't diving, and created a whole program to get them in the water, which is probably pretty easy in the Florida Keys, but also explaining what your students are seeing versus what was there before.
Precisely. The course I teach, EcoPro, is 6 days long, and we do 8 dives in that time. And probably 60% of it is geared to having them understand coral reefs, not just in terms of the information, but going out in the field and doing health assessments, doing surveys, doing substrate surveys, doing invertebrate surveys, and understanding what it means for a reef to look healthy or not healthy. And in the process, while we're doing these practical scientific things, the students begin to understand. And the biggest compliments that's paid to me is when a student, comes back and says, I'll never look at a coral reef the same way. And boy, that to me, that is success, because that's really what we try to do, is to have them really understand what's going down there at its very essence.
So can you touch on that connection between understanding of the heart, getting that sense of conservation, and then making those personal choices of what to consume, especially when we're talking about reef animals?
Yeah, in chapter 12 of my book, or actually chapter 11 of the book, I talk about a new relationship with the ocean and trying to change the mindset of customer to guest. And, because that's not just semantics, that's an important change in attitude and mindset, because guests defer, customers demand. And by starting with that kind of a mindset, getting people to really understand and appreciate what the ecosystem's about and how magical and special that is. And then with a little bit of scientific insight, understanding that coral reefs are extremely susceptible to overfishing. And until very recently, there really weren't any guides to seafood in a tropical setting, except for the Seafood Watch card for Hawaii. But recently, the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People program down at the Mesoamerican Reef published a seafood guide for the tropics. And it's pretty simple. It's something a little bit more elaborate than that I've been encouraging for a long time. Don't eat fish that are resident to the reef. That means grouper, snapper, and parrotfish. Avoid those.
I was in Cuba 2 years ago diving and ran into a 30-year-old Dutch diver, asking what he was doing. He's saying, I was spending the next 2 years diving the top reefs of the world because he wants to do it while they're still there. So I guess the challenge now is, how do we scale up, or can we scale up eco-restoration? I mean, we did a media training at a coral restoration conference last year that was interrupted by a hurricane. So we're kind of in a race for survival with the key habitats we love to dive in, whether it's coral reefs or kelp forests.
Yet we are in a race. That's certainly the case. And, restoration, I think, has a place. Even tourism, the term now restorative tourism is starting. That whole idea is creeping into the tourism sector. And of course, the question is, will we win the race or not? And, frankly, I tend to be a glass half empty kind of a person. And people sometimes ask, well, it's interesting you would spend your life, as a conservationist. And, and my answer to that is, I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that things turn out well. The trajectory isn't terribly positive right now, but, I certainly don't want to give up or imply that it's hopeless, because I don't think it is. But we certainly are at a precipice.
I was at DEMA a number of years ago and saw big, large photographs of divers in camo spearfishing laying on reefs.
And DEMA is?
DEMA is the Dive Equipment and Marketing Association. They have big dive expos. And I've also seen that DEMA is now supporting more dive conservation. I know that PADI and SSI, Scuba Schools International, are putting together dive programs that are encouraging conservation and cleanups. DEMA has been hesitant to address climate change, which is kind of the big elephant in the world, so to speak. And so I'm wondering, we know that conservation and restoration, all of these things need to happen. Are you seeing changes in the industry where they are acknowledging this and really trying to change these mindsets of divers and those training divers?
Address the sea elephant in the room.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I think first of all, by the way, I think I know exactly the photograph. It was part of a booth display, and that particular company got some extreme feedback, negative feedback as a result of that. It was noted extensively in the industry, but I do think finally, the jig is up, as I said before. The industry is beginning to acknowledge to what degree they're effectively doing something about it. I think varies. I think it would be unfair to say the industry is doing nothing. I think there are organizations, a lot of the manufacturers are doing a lot now to change their packaging and their manufacturing materials, and having a lighter footprint in that regard. And I think what is happening in diving is just consistent with society in general. The old guard is dying out, and as younger people come in who have been, who understand more fully what the problem is, they're changing the nature of the industry. And I think there are more and more entities like that in our industry that are doing that. And again, the more pressure that's put upon them by consumers, the more incentive they have to do that.
So I'm looking at your book, Beneath the Blue Planet, A Diver's Guide to the Ocean, and there's a green banner at the top that says Reef Smart Education. So what exactly is Reef Smart Education? And you also teach a course on regenerative tourism. What's that all about?
Well, first of all, Reef Smart Guides, my publisher, I've known Ian Popel for quite some time, and he and his partner, Pete McDougall, they're both graduate level marine biologists. And they've had a series of Lonely Planet-like guides to dive destinations for a number of years, but they've always wanted to get more into education. And I came aboard technically as the director of education for them to launch what we hope to be a series of educational materials and even programs that will, better provide the kinds of experience and knowledge that is necessary. So that my book is hopefully, at least we're planning it to be the first in a series. On the tourism side, when I was at the college, we have a program there called Marine Environmental Technology, and it was a very, very field intensive. My students typically pursuing a 2-year degree would end up with between 80 and 100 scientific dives in 2 years. So it was very practical. Additionally, I also taught a course there called Marine Ecology for Tourism Professionals. I tried to merge my background in tourism to ecology, and that course kind of inspired me when I retired to tweak it to make it a bit more focused to dive professionals. And that, in essence, was the skeleton by which I developed my Eco Pro course, as I call it, which is basically a 6-day intensive experience, giving students an insight into sustainable tourism, regenerative issues, reef ecology. We talk about shark tourism. We talk about coral restoration. We talk about citizen science, volunteerism, and environmental interpretation. And so it's really a pretty intense 6 days.
So there's the consumer level, which is use less plastic, be conscious of sunscreens, slip, slap, slop, put on a hat, use only zinc oxide, not petrochemical based. And then there's petrochemical industry as a whole, and stopping the use of fossil fuels across many sectors and political engagement. I guess people don't make that connection between loving the ocean and advocating for large scale change.
Yeah, I think humans react to crises, and it's only been recent that I think people are looking at what's happening in the atmosphere and saying, "Whoa, there's definitely something wrong." And so this is another race. I mean, do we wise up and make positive change with regard to CO2 before we have, Katrina-like storms commonly, or not? I think that the corner has been turned, at least in my experience, where people know that even if they're not doing the right thing, they know that what they're doing is wrong. And more pressure is applied every day by folks who are making the commitment to, point up the fact that it is wrong. It's almost like smoking. Today, I think most smokers will agree that, it's something they shouldn't do, and they're, I wouldn't say they're necessarily ashamed, but they know that it's socially not acceptable. And I think that kind of mindset might be happening with regard to carbon issues and living with a lighter footprint.
I know I was just in DC and lobbying for ocean climate action at the same time, feeling at home because of all the wildfire smoke that was coming down from Canada.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I was covering wildfires here in California. It's that global phenomena. You used to have to travel to cover the climate emergency. Now it's coming to a neighborhood near
Not
you.
more.
I think people understand, or beginning to understand, the ocean's in trouble. They're not very clear on exactly what's going on. And I think what's nice on having a compendium like your book, Beneath the Blue Planet, is to have an opportunity to really break down all the cascading disasters, and more importantly, how we respond to them, what we can begin to do. And what you were saying before about glass half full, half empty, I don't care about optimist or pessimist anymore. I'm into triage. We're going to save what we can while we can.
I think that's a good perspective.
I was just saying, and with the triage, I think we're all trying to do it with a smile on our face and trying to engage people. So there is the sense of community as we go forward.
Yeah, it has to be a positive approach, or people just turn off. I mean, there's still a whole significant group out there that are not convinced, and many of them could be persuaded, but we have to be careful as to how that's done. But I think we have two essential conservation problems in the ocean. One is it's the ocean. What's happening is beneath the surface. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. So unless you have the initiative to put on a mask, you may never see what the problem is. And that's why I think divers are so important, in serving as sentinels and really, calling to task when things are happening down there. And then secondly is, as I alluded to before, that's the shifting baseline. When I living in the Keys, I would be on charter boats all the time, and I'd come back from a dive almost in tears because I knew what that reef looked like 40 years ago. And yet most of the boat was just, high-fiving everyone because of the wonderful dive they had. It's just what they were exposed to when they were exposed to it. And that's a real tough problem. That's why, I really try to encourage, old guys like me to kind of hang in there and provide the perspective and try to make people understand, man, if I could take you in a wayback machine for one day to 1968 on Sombrero Reef and you jumped overboard, you'd be the most virulent conservationist in the world. Is that what we have lost? You cannot describe.
So, Alex, what are you hoping comes out of this book and also the course you're teaching now?
The book, I'm hoping, will provide, a source, a single source where someone can go and get a pretty comprehensive insight into what the ocean's all about and, appropriate ways to do something about it and, and behave in a way that's positive and contributing. In terms of tourism in my course, I'm hoping to raise awareness for the need for sustainable approaches to dive tourism and support efforts that are already out there. The Reef World Foundation in Britain, in Great Britain, they administer a UN program called Green Fins, and it's a wonderful program for sustainable tourism. Unfortunately, they're concentrated outside the U.S., primarily in the Indo-Pacific, a little bit in the Caribbean, and it's not really taken hold in the U.S. And so I'm hoping to kind of provide some kind of example here in North America of what sustainable tourism is all about, and just kind of broaden that whole idea. So I'm trying to move the needle is what I'm trying to do in both the course and with the book.
That sounds wonderful. And I have a copy of your book, and so does David, and we've really enjoyed reading it. And we've loved having a conversation with you, Alex. We want to
Likewise.
wish tremendous luck with getting the book out and about and your course. And I'm really excited that it's going to be open to the public around the country and maybe around the world. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for joining us on the Rising Tide Ocean podcast. And we will talk with you soon. Take good care.
I thank you for the time and good luck to all of you.
Rising Tide is a production of Blue Frontier, co-hosted by David Helvarg and myself, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein, with support from Natasha Benjamin and Ellie Kurla. Rising Tide's editing services and technical support is provided by Studio Cape May. The theme song is written and performed by Ethan Kenbarg. You can find Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast, at bluefront.org or download it from Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free, the sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the Blue Frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the Blue Frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are. Good boy, Sparky.